here. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to kick us off in just a moment. Hope everyone is having a wonderful, what day is it? Tuesday today. I am, and hopefully enjoying some summer vibes. But yeah, let's kick things off here. So, going to be talking today about leading under pressure, strengthening team mental health. This is such an important topic. And while during the summer, I think we can, let our hair down a little bit, have a little bit more relaxation, these kind of issues are still bubbling underneath everything. So, I think it's very important to talk about them. Real quick, just to tell you a bit about our code of conduct, your big scary wall of legalese, but just basically means don't be a jerk. And if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me a DM in the chat. Just to also tell you a bit about PowerToFly, we help organizations recruit high performing and inclusive teams with events like this one, sourcing campaigns, and expert guidance. We're a 100% women led company, and we're backed by Morgan Stanley with 200 million professionals across our networks. And just to tell you a little bit about myself, my name's Rob. I'm the director of events and marketing at PowerToFly. I have been here for over 8 years, so a good amount of time. I've been working in events, marketing, and community development, though, for over 15 years. Worked here with PowerToFly, with American Express, with Meta, Microsoft, lots of great companies. And fun fact, I also own a video store in upstate New York, which is where I'm joining you from right now. Upstate New York, not the video store. But let's kind of dive into today's topic. Love for you to add anything to the chat that you want to add as well. I have some questions that were pre-submitted, so we'll get to those in just a bit. But first off, I want to talk a bit about kind of the state of mental health at work. So, really, burnout and stress, these are big issues. 50% of US workers experience moderate to severe burnout, depression, or anxiety. So take that into account. That's half of all US workers are feeling this. What are those top stressors? Well, I don't think these are probably come as much surprise, but 43% said politics, 42% global events, 37% said personal finances. And that really goes beyond just those initial facts. So let's talk a little bit about the state of mental health at work. 75% of US employees are in a low mood. And just think of that too, 75%. That's almost all US employees have a low mood. And that's according to surveys by Business Wire. And 74%, so pretty much the same amount, employees want resources addressing global and political turmoil. So all this stuff is happening in the world, and in so many cases, and I'm sure you've all been there as well, you kind of go to work and you're really told to ignore it. But every hour you're refreshing a news site to see what's going on there. Nothing's being talked about. And as you can see, workers want support with this. They don't want to just separate what's going on beyond the workplace and in the workplace. They want this to be more collected together. And 29% of employees feel they are truly thriving at work. So that's good, but that's a fairly low number. Again, if you look at 75% of employees that are in a low mood, to only 29% of employees are truly thriving. So there's a lot of improvement there to be had. And 70% of employees believe better work-life balance would reduce stress. So I think we've all been there as well. And as we've seen a move back to the workplace away from sometimes remote or more hybrid working environments, I would think we're seeing this more and more, the impact on kind of that work-life balance, work-life integration. And another really fascinating number too, 62% of employees want mental health resources from employers. So I think that's also very interesting as well. Oh, did anyone else lose audio? Can you hear me? Hopefully you can still hear me. So why does this matter? So stress it impacts productivity, retention, health outcomes, and performance. So these are big issues here. So, yes, we want to be concerned with our own well being, but also when it comes to our performance or performance of our teams, we can see that these kind of mental health issues are impacting things like productivity, retention, and ultimately costing the company more money as well. Okay, so let's continue kind of to dive in a bit deeper. So we actually ran our own poll at the beginning of this year in our What Talent Wants survey, and 45% of Power to Fly respondents identified mental health as a key priority. So almost half of the folks that we surveyed, and it was around 300 professionals, really think that mental health is a key priority for the workplace. And as of February 2026, 22% of 2026 rate health and mental health as a top three benefit. So as you can see, with our community, we had around 50% as a key priority. And overall, we had around 22%. So this also really includes, time off, retirement benefits, caregiving support. There's so many different ways to address mental health at the workplace. So, what are some of the external forces shaping well being? We touched on these at the start, but I want to go into them in a bit more detail here. So, first up, we know politics and world issues are real stressors. So, recent workforce data shows political and global uncertainty significantly affect outlooks and moods at work. 96% of people follow news about global turmoil. 71% say political tensions harm the culture. So, again, we are asked to kind of separate these, but so often, and I'm sure we've all been in this scenario, I know I have, on heavy news days, or if there's something really big happening in the world, you're spending sometimes just as much time doing your work as you are on news sites kind of following this news. And yet, none of it often really gets into the conversations we often have with our coworkers. And nearly half of respondents, according to this Business Wire poll, say life was easier during COVID-19 pandemic than in early 2025, signaling current environment stress. So again, some of this goes back to the return to office as well. Maybe because we are just kind of focusing on this one big issue of COVID, all these other issues weren't coming into place. But as you can see, so many people were thinking, oh gosh, things were actually easier then, despite all that turmoil. And mental health and work are really inseparable. So employees increasingly expect employers to respond to whole person well-being and not just productivity. So as I mentioned, productivity definitely plays a part in this, but you are seeing, and I think a lot of this kind of did come post COVID as well, and also as kind of maybe traditional DIB morphed more into some mental health initiatives. You're seeing people really want these in the workplace, whether these are true benefits, whether these are through employee resource groups, or what have you. So the people side, expectations and barriers. So again, I'll dive a bit more into what I was just mentioning. The workforce wants this kind of meaningful support. 38% of employees feel their manager actively supports stress reduction. So that's great. But again, 38%, there's a lot of room to grow there. And almost all employees want employers who value emotional well being and respect boundaries between work and personal time. And despite this, significant barriers still remain because nearly half of employees fear negative consequences if they discuss mental health at work. This is still this very third rail issue that we have, at least especially in the United States, but I'm sure globally around the world. And as we did touch on before, engagement on productivity, disengagement remains low. Only about 31% of employees were engaged at work in recent data, showing a strong connection between mental health and organizational performance. So, again, are you clicking away on news sites? Is your mind elsewhere? Are you thinking about your personal financial problems? All these things are disengaging you from the workplace. And if employers step in more, we can reduce this disengagement and increase engagement and ultimately increase productivity and so many other things. So I'm going to share some practical leadership strategies here. So what can we do to actually turn the ship around in these cases? And whether you are a leader at your company, an aspiring leader, an individual contributor, you can then still go to your manager and say, hey, can we consider doing things like this? Or if you're in an ERG, go to them and talk this out. So, really, number one, creating psychological safety and boundaries. So, normalize that that open dialogue there. So, again, so many of these issues are not discussed in the workplace. Let's start discussing them. Establish clear forums for respectful discussion. So this kind of comes up a lot, maybe around political issues as well. But if you can have, we're all adults. That's what I like to always think of. We can have these kind of conversations, but we do need those guardrails around them. So having those clear forums, again, whether that's through an employee resource group or having something like a monthly mental health check-in. Train managers on emotional intelligence and spotting early stress signals. So I think this also goes hand in hand with having regular check-ins with your employees or with the members on your team. If you are only meeting one-on-one with a team member once a quarter, well, you're not going to know what those stress signals are. If you're meeting with them once a week, then you can much better see where those are coming out. So having that training there, but then also having that regularity and define and enforce healthy boundaries, protect that focus time, no meeting hours, discourage off-hour messaging. A lot of people will make sure they're using their Google Calendar in a wise way and say, I'm blocking this time out to eat lunch because I don't want to eat lunch and work, or I'm blocking this time out to do heavy thinking, or I'm going to block all my Friday off from meetings. That doesn't mean I'm not working, but I'm going to use that day to kind of catch up on the other things I need to do without having that taken up by meetings. And then just addressing the distractions, the politics, the world events. So offer some guidance on managing news fatigue. So send out in your Slack, send out in newsletters. What are some ways that you can manage this news fatigue? Maybe just say, you know what, check the news once in the morning for an hour and then don't look at it again until at night, or don't look at it at all for the rest of the day, or turn off push notifications on your phone. Any of these things will really help with that news fatigue, not even just for from a work standpoint, but also from a larger standpoint as well. And kind of as addressed this above, but provide candid but neutral spaces for facilitator-led discussions. And especially this is difficult around politics. People don't want to just discuss this in the workplace, but have a place where, again, there's maybe you bring in an outside facilitator if there's not someone at work to have these kind of conversations, especially around things, especially around maybe election time or stuff like that, where it's really being inundated with it. And then educate on empathy and inclusion. I think, at PowerToFly, for us, it always comes back to these two things as well. So diverse work viewpoints should be respected while still maintaining that workplace professionalism. And just a few more here as well. So resilience and systems, I think is super important. So embed that well-being into all your workflows. That could be flexibility, that could be, making sure you have reasonable workloads, making sure your team members have autonomy as well. Expand and simplify access to mental health resources. So again, this is something we're seeing a lot more happen. Are people investing at the core benefit level into these kind of mental health resources? Is your company, for example, covering if you want to go see a social worker or a psychologist? Is that going to be included as part of your overall company benefits? And then encouraging breaks, PTO use, and workload redistribution. This is, it seems like it's common sense, but so many people don't even use all their PTO. Maybe they're afraid because, oh, if I use PTO, my manager is going to look down on me. So if you are a manager, make sure you're saying, you know what, it's okay to take this PTO. Step away from your computer, make it very clear to folks. And then the cultural and restructural move. So, it all starts at the top, right? So launching that leadership training, and that can be for your top leaders, down to, aspiring leaders as well. Those peer support networks or mentorship circles, are again an ERG can have a lot of roles here, but if you have mentorship benefits at your company, this is very key. Collect and act on ongoing feedback. This is a big one as well. So are you collecting that kind of feedback? It can be anonymous, it could have a name linked to it, but are you asking for that kind of feedback? And then just as important as asking for it is actually reading it and acting on it as well. And review performance metrics to discourage burnout incentives. Again, this kind of comes down to making sure, are you meeting regularly with team members as well, in large groups, in smaller groups, in one-on-ones. I think it is very important. And all that's to say, supporting mental health isn't a one-time program. It's a leadership commitment that strengthens trust, performance, and retention. So I'll stop there. And if there's any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. But in the 15 minutes that we have left, I'm going to answer a few of the questions that were pre-submitted as well. So, question we had from someone is, with everyone bearing stress differently and ongoing uncertainty, how can leadership best support managers who are absorbing the brunt of their team's stress? Well, I think definitely it also, again, all goes up to the top. One, are the very top leaders meeting regularly with managers in order to help them combat and know what's happening on their team? Or is your CEO only meeting with those managers, say, once a month, and then in that case where they don't know what's happening regularly? So I think it's very important to keep those conversations going on a regular basis. And then people need resources, right? And sometimes resources means spending money. But again, do you need to bring in an outside facilitator to help with these kind of things? Are there outside programs that you need to invest in? I think all this is very important. And it comes back down to, first, that manager needing to figure out from their team members, what do they need? Maybe that's sending out, again, an anonymous survey to figure that out and kind of going from there. So another question that we had was, what's the real difference between leading under pressure and learning under pressure, and how do the two intersect? Well, I think they're very similar in that way, because I think as leaders we're all also already learning. What when we go to school, we learn our skills, we learn about management, we learn about marketing, we learn about tech. We don't often learn about how to be a manager. You're usually learning how to be a manager in the moment through doing it, really, and through osmosis from your own managers that you respect. So I think really that learning under pressure is happening all the time and is really synonymous with leading under pressure. I know there are leadership trainings out there, obviously, that that you can do, but I think for so many of us, we have to know it in the moment. And I think often there are big issues that are coming up that we don't have anticipated. We mentioned COVID before. Like, that's a big issue that we would have never known how to address as companies, as managers, when that's happening. And that's why it's also great to find out within the broader network, outside of even your workplace. Go onto LinkedIn and see, hey, what else are people doing right now when they're trying to combat? Have you ever had to deal with this? Like, put it out there into your circle and see what happens, especially if you have maybe a mentor outside of work as well. Okay, here's another question that came in, which is, change has been the only constant these past few years. How do you identify and get ahead of change fatigue on a team, given the fatigue shows up differently for everyone, and how do you recognize it? I think that's a great question. And of course, AI has been probably the biggest sense of change. And we're also experiencing AI fatigue as well. We recently did an event on that. I think there's a few things. I think, reading the news, and again, not in the context we were talking before, but keeping abreast at all what the trends are in the world is super important. That way you can get ahead of it. And of course, there's things that you can't necessarily predict in that way, but AI is a great example. There's so much about being written about it every day. So I would take a look at what's happening out in the world in terms of, say, AI, and say, okay, here's some of the big challenges that are coming up because of it. Let me see how I can start to address this with my team or at my organization. So I think that's super important. And then again, I think it all comes down to meeting regularly with your team members and with the larger organization. You're not going to be able, so many often it, takes a lot for a team member to come to you and say, hey, I'm having these issues. But if you are meeting with them regularly, you are going to start to see that themselves. And maybe it's also doing evaluation, sending out feedback, or maybe it's sending out something to your team and saying, this is not meant to criticize your work. I just want to see how you're spending the day. Tell me how much time you're doing meetings, how much time you're doing answering emails, how much time you're actually coding, or for example, and then see, hey, if they're spending most of their time in meetings or answering emails and very little time coding, like right away, there might be these other stressors that are happening in their lives. So how can you take away some of those meetings and then give them more time to do the work that they actually need to do? Okay, just a couple more questions here. So, this one is another great one. So, how do you maintain medical privacy while still supporting a team's mental health and well-being, both as a team member, as a leader? Great question. Very, definitely not always the easiest thing to do, but I think often it comes down to making sure if you are getting feedback, or making sure there's multiple ways to give feedback. So again, maybe that feedback is coming in through a one-on-one, but you might not always have someone who's willing to do that. So are you putting out a place, and it should be evergreen, that there's a place to give survey, to give feedback, and it can remain anonymous. So if someone says, hey, we don't have a benefit that pays for therapy work, you don't need to know who that is that's saying it, that they are, but someone's asking for it. And then you can then put that out to the team and see, hey, is this something you're interested in? Again, not singling anyone out, but if this was a benefit that we pushed for or we added, would people want to take advantage of it? And again, maybe you keep that anonymous as well. And then if people want to do, therapy on their own, on during work time, which obviously often has to be the case because a therapist might not be working in a post-work time. I do think you'll have to have that conversation with, your direct report, or you have that conversation with your manager. But in terms of everyone else on the team, they don't need to know that. You could block out your calendar and say, hey, this is an issue, hey, this person's here doing this right now. Or has something on their calendar these days, no one needs to know what it is. And yeah, Gary said in the chat, one of the most stressful conditions I observe at work is usually to reach a benchmark, sometimes lead to a certain internal conflicts instead of leading to the improvement. What's the best way to handle this? I think work back schedules and really knowing what that benchmark is. How are you going to achieve that? I think it has to be a two-way conversation, Gary, with the person who's setting those benchmarks and making sure they're realistic from the beginning. So I think when those are set, like, you have to have that conversation with your manager or who's ever setting those and going, okay, can we actually legitimately get to this in the 4 weeks time, or 12 weeks time? And if the answer is no, like, I would say have that conversation right from the start, or have different levels. There's the stretch benchmark that you want to get to. That's the one where you go, okay, maybe if we push, if everything aligns, we can get to that. But that's the stretch one. And then there's the more standard one that we all feel comfortable that we can get to together, because ultimately it's not going to look good on anyone if you're not making those benchmarks. So I think having those different levels and having that conversation from the very beginning is super important because I know I've been asked, in my career all the time, hey, we have to do this, we have to get to this number, and you have to then look at the data beforehand and go, okay, there's no way we can get to this, or there's we can get to this, but I'm going to need X, Y, and Z resource. Often that means, funding in order to get to it. So if you want to give me that funding, we can get to that number. If you don't have that funding for me right now for ads, for overtime, whatever it is, then we need to readdress. But I think that's a great question. Oh, no, and thank you. So yeah, the last question I had kind of pre-submitted here. So if anyone wants to add any other questions, happy to take those. But one that we hear all the time. So, beyond public statements on diversity, what are the real signs that an employer is financially inclusive? That's very interesting because we love that phrase here, but you don't hear that often. And how can the candidates evaluate that during interviews? I think that last part is the real key to it, which is that a candidate needs to do that research during the process, during the hiring process there. And I think, to me, like, that financial inclusivity really starts by looking at what the benefits are for that company. And again, like, going back to some of the mental health benefits, is it listed that they'll pay for therapy? If you're an LGBTQ person, and you want to maybe have a family, is in vitro included, for example, things like that. And that might not directly be involved in financial inclusivity, but it is in the long run, because if you're wanting to do, adopt a child or do in vitro, if, for whatever reason, those are big financial burdens that you have on you if they're not being supported by your workplace. So, not every company is going to have every benefit, but I think seeing what those are there and then having the conversations. I think if a company is hiring in a good way, they should be lining up a inclusive hiring panel that you're speaking with. You shouldn't just be speaking with one person. And if you are any kind of underrepresented worker, from, you're a veteran, you're LGBTQ, you're, a person of color, like, you should also be speaking with someone at the company who represents that same identity group as you. And if the company doesn't have it, that's another conversation to have, and maybe a marker of where there is improvement to have. But definitely, the company should be doing that, but you can maybe go as far as, asking, hey, I want to know about such and such benefits. I didn't see them on your website. I know you don't probably list every benefit. Can we talk about this? And just having that conversation with the recruiter, with the hiring manager, with anyone else that you're speaking with at the company there. But I think it's definitely very, very important to have those. And always remember that when you're in the application process, it's a two-way conversation. You're interviewing them just as they are interviewing you, even though it often can just feel that one way. Well, thank you all. I hope this was beneficial to you, hearing kind of what's going on out there in the world, and hopefully some of the solutions I provided are things that you can take back to your own team as well. And we'll be back with more events here very soon. We have some very exciting events coming up on AI and many others in the near future. So check those out. But please reach out to me on LinkedIn or at rob@powertofly.com if you have any questions or want any kind of follow-ups there. And we'll send out this recording in a couple of days, so you can rewatch that all there. Or if you're watching the recording right now, please let me know. Again, feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Have a great rest of your day, everyone, and give yourself a little treat for attending today, because you are on your own path to be a better worker, a better